this webinar on 3D client assessment. We are excited to launch a new tool created by the ILO's Impact Insurance Facility and the Future Innovation Lab for Assets and Market Access with support from EA consultants. The tool provides a multi-dimensional approach to measure the value that agricultural index products offer to clients. The tool was created as part of a project supported by USAID in collaboration with UC Davis. In this webinar, we will discuss the need for the tool, introduce the tool and its various components, and provide some tips for practitioners or donors who want to use such a tool to assess the value of their own agricultural index insurance products. The webinar will run for about 60 minutes. We have reserved some time for questions at the end of the webinar, so please do post your questions using the questions text box, a box that you see in your control panel. And feel free to post your questions throughout the webinar. We will monitor them and then post them to the speakers at the end. So we have three wonderful speakers today. So the first is Chiu, who is the Assistant Director of the Future Innovation Lab for Assets and Market Access based at the University of California, Davis. In this role, she provides both administrative and strategic support for a wide portfolio of research focused around the topics of risk management and resilience, including the I4 Index Insurance Innovation. We also have with us Coralie Martin, who is a Climate Insurance and Financial Inclusion Specialist at EA Consultants. In this capacity, her work concentrates on developing solutions to address the needs of low-income populations and has participated in various studies aimed at assessing the potential for index insurance products targeted at smallholder farmers. And finally, Prashad is a Senior Technical Officer with the ILO's Impact Insurance Facility. He leads our work on agricultural insurance distribution and the use of technology and inclusive insurance. Pranav has more than 2 decades of experience in insurance and business management and has previously initiated and taken to scale agricultural and health insurance products for low-income households in India. I will now, we'll get started. So I'll hand over to Pranav, who will present the motivation behind the tool and explain how it was created. Tara will then talk about the importance of client value for index products. And then finally, Coralie will actually present the tool and the various indicators that we're using and explain how to conduct the evaluation analysis. So Pranav, I'm handing it over to you now.
Thanks, Aparna, and a very good morning, afternoon, evening to all of you who've logged in from the various corners of the world. We are very excited to be doing this webinar and briefly discuss with you the work that we've been doing at the facility with the University of California at Davis with support from the UC Davis under what we had set up in 2014 as the Global Action Network for Agriculture Insurance. The network was essentially consisting of diverse range of participants from the development sector, research organizations doing cutting-edge research in agriculture insurance, reinsurers, and others who were thinking about the various issues, challenges, barriers to scaling of agriculture insurance. The objective of the network was to deal with frontier issues that were impacting or restricting the scaling of agriculture index insurance. And so we worked across topics ranging from quality of the contract, bundling and aggregation, education of the customer outreach, how to reach out to them, issues related to data and accuracy of data and how could that be improved, technological innovations, and also with the government organizations in seeing how can insurance be embedded in public policy to solve some of the problems that the governments are trying to tackle in their respective countries. Overall, the objective was to look at all these aspects in trying to develop agriculture insurance and index insurance, which had gained currency over a period of time, into a sustainable and viable business and move from pilots to business as usual stage. Moving on to the next slide, we've been trying to see in this network, how can insurance provide and fulfill the true value? And what is that true value? Is actually the fact that usually insurance in the development sector has always been looked as a protective tool. We wanted to take the discussion forward and see how can this protective tool also act as a productive tool which works on a sound economic logic. Can insurance lead to better access to resources, which can help in increased productivity and increase incomes for the farmers? Can insurance act as a trigger for more credit, better farm inputs, enabling the farmers to undertake riskier but more productive and lucrative activities, which can push them higher up on the economic cycle, and then they can put in more investments on the farms and therefore go into an upward spiral in that sense. We did a nice impact studies also, and we have very uplifting examples from Ghana, Mali, Kenya, India, where farmers have shown a proclivity to invest more if they are insured. They have increased the farming areas. They have invested more on the farms in terms of better seeds and better production practices. And we hope that over a period of time, this can lead to greater scale and insurance can fulfill its clear role in the entire economic environment. But all this will come to work if there is value created, and therefore you'll hear more about this in the tool itself. Across all the stakeholders in the process, there needs to be a value for definitely for the farmers and the consumers. They need to see value in it, and we've discussed some of the circumstances under which it can happen. But it is also equally critical for there to be value for the providers, the insurers, the channels, the aggregators. They need to see it as an economic activity for themselves and a sustainable activity for them. And not only for these two broad areas, but also whenever the government is involved and government uses insurance as a part of its trying to fulfill the policy objectives, they also need to see value coming in from these products that they are supporting, so that these products can actually act when they are supposed to act and try and provide relief when they are supposed to provide relief, or propel greater investments in that sense. All these things can come together when projects fulfill certain criteria and therefore develop into sustainable projects over a period of time. And that becomes the key to making agriculture insurance as a part of what we call business as usual and get true value from it. But why is this value important is also an aspect that we've been talking about, and we'll hear about it in the webinar as we go along. And therefore, we wanted to look more closely at the tool, which now combines the facilities basic tool on client value, which is the PACE tool, which looks at aspects of product, access, cost, and experience, and combines them with the quality aspect. And what is that quality? Is that the customer actually gets the benefits that the product should give at a time when there is actual occurrence of that event, whatever that event can be. So we try and combine all these aspects and see how they can actually help the customer in times of need, as well as the other stakeholders. It is one thing to have a good and relevant product, but it is also important as to how the consumers and the channels understand it. How can the product be reached? How can the customers access it? How affordable is it? how and what aspects is it available, the appeal for the product. So the new tool tries and captures all these aspects and bring them under one thing so that we know the direction in which we are heading. Is it right? Is it creating value at all stages or not? As I said, this tool combines the pace and the minimum quality standards that the products need to offer. So we started thinking about it almost 3 years back, and we formed a small working group that was working on it. And with the help of EA consultants and various partners on the field, we tried various versions of the tools in 5 pilots across the globe, which was across diverse regions and participants. As you can see, the countries involved were Ethiopia, Kenya, Zambia, Senegal, and Peru, covering Africa and both Anglophone and Francophone Africa, as well as Latin America. And the pilots involved direct interaction with farmers, conducting focus group discussions with agents and channels, discussions with the management teams looking at these projects, cooperative members, organizers, and various kinds of intermediaries and facilitators, development sector organizations too. The feedback that was collected was shared among the GAN network members. Their inputs were taken, kind of back to the drawing board exercise, and we improved upon what was initially done. And now we feel that we have this tool which has been influenced by inputs from all these people, and it has greatly impacted and improved our approach to quality and value so that the tool can actually fulfill its objectives and help the scaling up of agriculture insurance as we go forward. I think I'll stop at this stage and hand it over to you, Tara, to discuss aspects about quality and what is value and how can it be actually translated and seen on the field. So over to you, Tara.
Thanks so much, Pranav, and good morning, everyone, or evening or afternoon. Thanks for joining. To get started, I wanted to just kind of echo what Pranav said about the potential value of agricultural index insurance, both before a shock occurs and after. Next slide. So he's covered well, I think, so I won't spend any more time on it. The goal of an index insurance product, a quality index insurance product, is to adequately protect farmers against fluctuations and shocks and to allow farmers to invest more before a shock. But I think something we need to keep in the back of our mind as we think about quality is that with a low quality contract, the worst thing that can happen gets worse. And that is a primary safety objective. Next slide. So what we've observed in the field, and we've observed a lot of issues in the field, sometimes farmers have misunderstood the terms of a contract, thinking it covers one type of risk when in fact it does not. We've seen farmers who don't know the payout mechanism. In particular, this has been a challenge in certain projects with insurance products linked to loans. They are not sure if farmers are receiving the payout themselves or if the payout goes to the balance of the loan. So that understanding is essential. Otherwise, farmers might feel that the product betrayed them or let them down in some way. We've also seen challenges with payouts coming much later than farmers expected. The idea behind the insurance is to avoid costly coping mechanisms after a shock occurs, such as loan default, selling assets, reducing consumption. And if the loan payout doesn't come in time to avoid these effects, then it fails the farmer. We've also seen that farmers at times don't even know that they're insured. They don't understand that they are in fact protected in this way, which can really inhibit the potential of agricultural insurance to induce behavior change and to induce increased investment if that's what farmers want. And then one that we find most essential in terms of potentially making worse situations worse or bad situations worse is that poor indices fail to pay out when farmers have truly experienced a loss that was intended to be covered by the insurance. Next slide. So as we worked with the ILO and EA consultants on this, we've noticed that the importance of evaluating value can occur several times through the process. before to identify and avoid potential pitfalls before the product goes to market, during to identify opportunities to address existing problems or problems that may emerge in the future, and then during scaling to ensure that the quality and value are maintained before scaling up to new areas. Next slide. And I think in line with this, and Pranav alluded to this as well, there are multiple people who have a strong stake outside of the farmer in making sure that value is maintained. Donors, to evaluate whether donor funds are being effectively spent and to ensure that at a minimum they're doing no harm, they're not making farmers worse off. For insurers, this is an important tool to assess the product to see if improvements can be made to make the product more sustainable and to have it be, as Pranav said, business as usual. And then for the public sector, to evaluate whether the public funds that are being spent to meet certain policy objectives are well spent, especially considering the opportunity costs or what else they could be doing with that funding. Next slide. So this is an introduction to the tool itself. There are 14 indicators of client value over 3 dimensions. I won't go into the details of every single indicator, but I do want to cover briefly the 3 categories. The design focuses primarily on the creation of the contract and the terms of the contract to make sure that the contract being sold is designed in such a way that it will be of value to smallholder farmers. The distribution focuses on getting the sales and getting the product itself to the farmers who need it. And then delivery is more focused on the payouts and making sure that payouts occur as they should and in a timely manner. Next slide. For each of these indicators, the evaluation process allows for a measurement of client value based on the criteria and the information gathered for that indicator. For indicators receiving a strong rating, this means it meets the standards set by the tool, but the process can still reveal important insights on how to increase the client value. For indicators receiving an average score, that means that indicator, the product has received the minimum requirements set by the tool, but there are important gaps that have been highlighted. And for those receiving a poor score, that indicates that there have been shortcomings that are very important for client value that have been identified. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about indicator 1, which is that the product reliably, the index used reliably predicts what's happening on the ground. And this is important because index insurance is an invisible trait that's not easily observable by the consumer, and in fact can take years to observe if it's 3 years until a shock occurs. So when you think about this, you look at this woman in the picture who has this insurance contract, but essentially it's a piece of paper, and looking at it, she can't assess whether or not it's quality. As a result of this, it's easy for consumers to be taken advantage of with low products. And because this doesn't have regulations that prohibit poor products going to market, as is often done in the seed sector, for example, this kind of unregulated market can reach an equilibrium with low quality insurance and then low demand. Next slide. That's why we believe there's a need for quality standards, so that at a minimum, as I said earlier, we do no harm. It's important to make high quality insurance products, but it can be more expensive, and it can take years before an insurance payout or a lack of one that should have occurred to make clear whether the insurance is low quality or high quality. And many publicly subsidized index insurance products available offer little more protection to farmers than a lottery ticket, and we believe we can do better by quantifying the value through certain tools. So for individual farmers, the stakes are high. Next slide. So we introduced minimum quality standards out of University of California, Davis, which is incorporated into the 3D tool. And the minimum quality standards are an objective measure of index insurance quality to easily compare how an index insurance contract compares to having no insurance. Basically, we're asking the question, would farmers be better off without the insurance or with it? And if we can determine that households would be better off economically buying the insurance, then we can say that the insurance meets minimum quality standards. Next slide. So the minimum quality standards are there to make sure a perfectly good tool, agricultural index insurance, and high potential emerging markets for insurance would not be destroyed. So the tool we've put into the 3D tool is a way to measure this indicator and provide results to these important questions of whether a farmer would be better or worse off. It uses historical data as an estimate for farmer income and also historical data on index insurance to answer these questions. What we need to keep our eye on, and I think this tool, the 3D tool, will help with, is bad products can drive out good products in a market. If there are consistently poor quality products being put to market that fail when farmers need it, this is going to drive out the market for good products as well, as farmers lose trust in insurance in general. So a long-term perspective demands investment in product development, that you collect the data necessary and you make that a minimum standard for you, such that the product you're taking to market either meets or surpasses minimum quality standards. So without minimum quality standards, poor products can ruin the reputations of the insurance companies and possibly people who invest in them, and destroy the potential market for insurance moving forward. So with that, I'll conclude. Aparna, back to you.
Great, thanks, Tara. So just to actually maybe get a little bit more into the details of the minimum quality standard measure. So what data do practitioners or researchers need to assess whether the product meets MQS? And is this something that practitioners can calculate on their own, or do they need help from researchers?
There's a fair amount of data required to run a rigorous MQS test, including off-farm income, the information about the product itself, including the unsubsidized market price, and then farm yield and income data, which can be difficult to collect at times. If it's readily available, this is a relatively simple test to run. We have a spreadsheet that enables this calculation to be done. If the data is not already readily available, or is available but not at a low level of aggregation, the lowest level of aggregation is best in terms of getting an accurate measure. You'll probably need the help for the data collection portion of it, but it's not very complex, and it can be done for a relatively low cost, especially compared to the overall investments in the product. So I think it depends on the data availability, but regardless, this data is, if it's not readily available, relatively easy to collect.
Okay, great, thank you. There are a few more questions coming in, but we'll wait. I think I'll hold on to them right now. Let's maybe jump to Coralie now, who will talk a little bit about how to conduct the analysis and explain a bit more of some of the other indicators that we are suggesting.
Right. Thanks, Aparna, and good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining our webinar. So if we can move, straight to the next slide. So as Tara and Pranav mentioned earlier, being able to measure the value that a product brings to the end client is very important. It's important to ensure that products can be sustainable and scale. And it's also essential to ensure that at a minimum, the products that reach the market do not harm farmer. But of course, the question is how. How do you conduct this assessment? How do you measure, and how do you bring objectivity and consistency in a concept that is as broad and as complex as client value? And so what this tool offers, the 3D tool offers, is really a way to address this challenge and a methodology to assess products against a set of standards that are measurable and that are defined standards of quality. So the tool looks at value across 3 dimensions, which Tara already presented. So we have design, distribution, and delivery. It provides a list of indicators of client value. We have 14 indicators. But it also provides guidance on how to conduct the evaluation. So for each indicator, you will have information on which data sources are needed, what information is required for each of them, what are the thresholds, what are the criteria, and how to come up with a scoring for each indicator on a scale from 0 to 2. Moving on to the next slide. So these are the 14 indicators of client value that have been defined by this tool. As you can see, each indicator is associated with a dimension and will aim to assess specific elements of client value. So when you're using the 3D tool, conducting the assessment will involve gathering and analyzing data to obtain a scoring for each of these 14 indicators. Unfortunately, we won't have time to go through each of them in the time that we have for this webinar. But just to give you a better idea of how the tool works in practice, I'd like to still give a concrete example of one indicator for each dimension and show in more detail how they are structured. So if we take the example of indicator 2 in the design dimension, here, for example, we're looking at here we are looking at a screenshot of the tool. So this is actually the environment that you work with when you are using the tool. So indicator 2 measures whether the product covers appropriate activities. Because one of the elements of product design that is essential when you assess client value is to cover a crop that is relevant to the farmers. Because of course, if the product covers a crop that farmers do not cultivate or that represents a very small portion of their income, the product may not be able to fulfill its promise and to protect farmers against income fluctuations. So assessing this could seem very straightforward, but often it's not, because farmers, in order to diversify their risks, may cultivate multiple crops, which will serve different purposes in their lives. So in order to assess client value in this aspect, what we do when we conduct a 3D assessment is that we go back to the farmers and we ask them which crop is relevant to them, meaning in this case, one, is it important to your household income? And two, does it require high investments? So as you can see on my screen, for this indicator, we also use other data sources. We will conduct interviews with the management. We will also use external data sources. This is to cross-check the information to make sure that we understand the rationale for choosing this specific crop for this specific product. But generally, the focus is really on farmers' inputs. Can we move to the next slide? So I just touched on something that I think is particularly important and quite unique about this tool, which is that not only does it assess client value, but it also takes the perspective of the client. This means that conducting a client value assessment using the 3D tool will involve going to the places where the product is distributed and actually talking to the end customers to get their insights. I'll give another example with another indicator in the distribution dimension this time. So here we are looking at indicator 6, which evaluates whether covered farmers are adequately informed of product details. And so to evaluate this with the 3D tool, our rationale is to say that if farmers are adequately informed, then they should know and they should understand the product details. So at minimum, they should be aware, for example, that they are covered. They should understand basic features and limitations of the product. And if it's not the case, the conclusion that we draw is that information is not conveyed in a way that can be understood and is useful to farmers. That more efforts need to be done to make sure that they obtain and understand this information. And this can be done in very different ways. So it could be sending reminders, finding better touch points and channels for communicating this information, or changing the way the information is presented, for example. Next slide. And so indicator 6 also show that there is an emphasis not only on what is offered, but also how the product is offered to clients. And I think that's also a very interesting aspect of this tool, because often what erodes client value is not just the product itself, but it's the way the product is offered. So sometimes it will be, you know, lack of information around it, lack of understanding of key features, delays in payment of indemnities, difficulties accessing payouts. And so some indicators will really focus on these aspects. I'll move to another example. This time in the delivery dimension. So indicator 13, for example, will assess whether a mechanism is in place to address questions and complaints that farmers may have. And so to measure this for this indicator, we will of course interview farmer, but we will interview the management to understand what has been done, what processes are in place, and what has been created. But we will also talk to the end customers to assess the effectiveness of these mechanisms and what farmers have experienced so far. So that's just 3 examples I wanted to highlight to show different aspects of the tool and how the indicators work when you are conducting an assessment. And now I'd like to talk a little bit more about how this tool can be used to conduct an analysis of client value for this type of products. So far, as Pranav said earlier, we tested the tool with 5 products. And based on this, we were able to develop a standard methodology that, of course, can be adjusted based on needs, but that we will kind of recommend following when conducting this evaluation. So we have 5 main steps. Step 1 is project planning, which is an important step to redefine the scope and the objectives of the assessment. This will mean typically trying to be clear on what the assessment tries to achieve. Is it to compare different products? Is it to improve the value of one specific product? Is it to make a decision of launching, whether or not launching a product? And based on this, the assessment can have different scope and different needs in terms of resources and time. Second phase is it's preparation, typically, and this one is also a very important phase that shouldn't be overlooked. It's the time of preparing the survey instruments, refining them, making sure they are adequate for the purpose of the evaluation, defining the areas where the assessment is going to be conducted, sampling, defining which farmers are going to be included in the analysis, and getting ready for a field trip. Then step 3 and 4 are really the core of the analysis. It will be going in country, interviewing farmers, conducting the different interviews, collecting data, and then analyzing this data and based on it, obtaining a scoring for each of the 14 indicators. And finally, of course, we are trying to do this for a purpose. So the last step would be to bring together all this information and try to identify opportunities for product improvements. If we can move to the next slide. So throughout these pilots, we were able to get some feedback and to refine and adjust the tool. And we also identified best practices and challenges that could be avoided. And from that, we created a set of supporting documents that can help anticipate and avoid some of these challenges. minimize delays, and hopefully make this process as easy and straightforward as possible. So we have developed a range of guides and templates and samples. We have notably a detailed step-by-step technical guide that provides guidance and tips throughout the different stages in the process on how to conduct the evaluation. We have the tool, of course, which is really the centerpiece of the evaluation. We have samples such as a sample work plan, sample template for presenting the information, and we have a set of templates and supporting documents for supporting the data analysis. So all these supporting documents and material will be released, I believe, soon in the next few weeks. So stay tuned for updates from ILO and UC Davis on these different documents. And finally, I mean, yeah, if we move to the next slide, finally, as a conclusion to this presentation, I'd like to share some of these tips and lessons learned that we experienced when we were conducting this evaluation. So first of all, as I said, the planning and preparation phases are very important, and particularly ensuring that a sufficient number of farmers from different geographic areas are in the sample and are interviewed. Often the products that are offered and that we assess are offered in different areas that can be more or less accessible, and due to resource constraints and logistical issues, sometimes it's not always easy to go there and to conduct the assessments in this area. But farmers in these different areas may have very different experiences with the products. They can be exposed to different climate conditions. Some of them may or may not have received payouts. They can have different exposure to the staff of the insurance company, for example. And when conducting the assessment, the tool is much more accurate and unbiased when we ensure that we have all these people in the sample. That's a very important aspect from the first phases. In the data collection, of course, a big part of it is the farmer surveys, but also obtaining administrative data from different stakeholders. And this information might not always be readily available. Partners may have to produce them specifically for the analysis. So being very clear and communicating the needs, even in terms of granularity or formatting early on to the partner, is something that will help minimize delays and make sure that the data is usable and accurate. Something else that we have experienced throughout these pilots, and that for this type of evaluation, it wouldn't be uncommon to hire local survey teams to conduct the survey with the farmers. When it's the case, it's generally quite easy to find a team that are qualified and well-trained, but often they might not be familiar with this specific type of product or with insurance. And we noticed that the training and the level of supervision that we put into this project and the surveying was very important and could help have much better results. And finally, involving the stakeholders throughout the process, getting buy-in and having this constant communication is also very helpful, both to facilitate access to information, but also to refine recommendations and make sure that the results of the assessments are relevant to the insurance company and to the farmers. So there are just a few tips and lessons learned that we integrating in the supporting documents I described earlier to help anticipate potential challenges and plan accordingly. Our objective with this has really been to create user-friendly material, make the process as simple as possible for the user. So we do hope that this will be useful and contribute to product improvements over time and help build this benchmark of client value. And so I'll be happy to answer more questions throughout the Q&A. And Aparna, Back to you.
Great, thanks, Coralie. So we actually have a lot of questions. I think that's a good sign for everyone. And there are a few overlapping ones. So I'll try to go through the most common ones first. So one question is around, so we have 14 indicators. Are there some indicators that are more important than others? And is there a minimum overall score before the product is considered, pass or fail, or before we consider that it meets the minimum quality standard? So Coralie and then maybe Tara, if you want to jump in as well.
Yeah, so regarding the importance of different indicators, we do have some indicators that we tend to prioritize, such as the covering the appropriate activity, covering the appropriate risks that seem more basic, let's say, than others. But as we were refining the tool and working on different versions of this tool, we kind of realized that all of these indicators have minimum standards that should be met to ensure that that the products are designed in a way that is helpful to farmers. So in the end, what we ended up doing is keeping all of these indicators and not really prioritizing them, but really having minimum criteria for each of them that should be met. So I can mention that we have a slightly adjusted version of this tool for before the product is launched. And that's when we have more of this pass-fail approach of really like the basic criteria that must be met. So I would say that, yeah, that generally it's more in terms of the standards within these indicators than the indicators themselves.
So Coralie, actually, there are a number of questions around this in terms of when can the tool be applied. So what can be done, ex ante before a product is rolled out, and whether this tool is only for existing products, or also new products.
Okay.
Maybe you can talk a little bit more of the past.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. So what we have designed is, so the tool I just presented in more detail is really more for assessing a product that already exists and checking with the experience of farmers what has been the results, if it's useful, if it's efficient, and assessing the value of the product against these different standards. We have also so an adjusted version of this tool, which we call the ex ante tool, which is really made for before the product is launched, checking that the conditions are here to make sure that the product will later on be able to meet these quality standards. That's more the approach. And so what you will have is typically, I already mentioned indicator 2 and 3, making sure that the product covers appropriate activities and risk. This is something that will be part of the ex ante tool directly. For indicators such as indicator 5, minimizing gaps in coverage, instead of asking farmers whether they have experienced a gap in coverage, what we will do is check if efforts have been made to understand, analyze the crop cycles, and make sure that the product is designed in a way that will minimize these gaps later. So that's how we turned every indicator into something that can be really assessed in a pass-fail basis, and basically minimum analysis and investigations that should have been done before the product is launched to ensure that later on it will be able to bring value to clients.
Okay.
Maybe Tara want to.
Sure, Tara, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Coralie has it well covered. The only thing I would add is that I think this would also be a useful tool as if you are to the point where you want to scale a product to new areas or new products, just to make sure that as you transfer what you've learned in the pilot or what you've learned in one area, the quality, if it's high quality, to ensure that that quality is maintained as you move into new areas, because the situation might, in the geographic situation, might affect some of these indicators. So making sure that if you move to new areas, the quality is maintained, I think is also a useful way to use the tool.
Okay. I'll probably go into one detailed question, which a couple of people have asked, is around the awareness indicators. I think, Coralie, this is indicator 6. So the question is, are we testing awareness or whether farmers are informed? Because it seems to, so the question is, it seems to be measured on how many farmers are aware of the program benefits. Are you also measuring the depth of their understanding levels?
So yes, so for indicator 6, that's also an interesting question, because that's an indicator that reflects how the tool is structured, and clearly to assess whether they obtain the right information, we will assess what they understand and what they know. So what we did for this indicator, so there are basically two aspects of it that we will measure. Is the first one will be more quantitatively how many farmers know. So we will have standards of a percentage of farmers who have an understanding of some basic features. And then we had to define which features we wanted to include. And that was quite a difficult exercise. We ended up saying that defining minimum information knowledge as knowing that you are covered, basically, and understanding some minimum features of the product. So what we have is knowing you are covered for what, which crop is covered, knowing which event is covered, and having some understanding that there is this basis risk, the risk that in some circumstances you could incur a loss but not get a payout. So yeah, basically we expect farmers to be able to say, I am covered for maize, for drought, and it can happen that sometimes I will not get a payout, basically. Okay. I don't know if that answers the...
I'll see if they post a follow-up question. I'll come back to you. So another question on results of the pilot. So have there been instances where the assessment results were shared with the insurers, and did this lead to any improvements in product or process delivery or payout designs?
Yeah, so we have shared the results of the assessments with all our partners. We have discussed different all of our findings and recommendations. That's also going back to one point I made about involving stakeholders in the process. I think what was interesting was really discussing this result and this feedback, and sometimes like refining our recommendations by talking to the partners, which have been very useful. I think it's a bit early to know if really the products have been already improved and brought more value. At this stage, we would have to conduct another assessment. But generally, we had very positive feedback from our assessments. We were able to highlight some important sometimes issues that sometimes insurers are aware of, maybe intuitively, but we are able to quantify it and to bring more attention to it and to start working on improvements. I don't know, I can share a concrete example. Often, so for example, we had a product that was bundled with sale of inputs, and we kind of expected that this could lead to some gaps in understanding of the product among farmers, and that's actually what we found. So by conducting the evaluation, we were able to find that there were actually an important gap in product understanding, people not really knowing what they have, if they are covered, what for. And so based on this, we also were able to identify some of the potential causes related to the distribution channels and issues, and we were able to discuss this and start working on improvements such as refining the incentive structure, upgrading the training of agents, and this type of thing. So yeah, I think in general, what our evaluation showed is that it's really possible and useful to, by talking to the end customer, to highlight issues and most importantly work on how to improve product value.
Okay. Question on kind of the supporting documents and templates that we have with the tool. So do the technical guidelines highlight ideal parameters for the assessment with respect to, say, sample size, maturity level of program, frequency of assessment? Does the tool have a sample size generator?
Okay, so we won't have a sample size generator really per se, but we do have some guidelines. That's also something that, so it's something that I mentioned briefly in the last slide of this presentation, is how important it is for this tool to have not necessarily a formally representative sample, but some level of diversity in the areas, in the, you know, like repartition between farmers who received an indemnity, who did not receive an indemnity, locations where you need to go depending on the area where the product is offered. And so what we have is sample guidelines. Basically, we have different brackets of depending on the scope of the product and places where it's distributed, how many farmers you should interview and how many locations you should visit. These are general guidelines that we give more as a rule of thumb, that as something that should be really followed very rigorously.
Okay. And maybe both for Tara and Coralie, how long does it normally take to conduct this evaluation? So how many man days are we talking about? Then in terms of costs for surveying, any indications on that? And then whether this kind of analysis can be done by an insurer themselves, or would they need to work with an external researcher or another external organization?
So in terms of timelines, I think it's important to recognize that this can vary depending on the scope and objective of the evaluation. Generally, in the pilots that we conducted, this on average would take 3 to 4 months. I would say that if everything goes well, you can target something like 2 months with most of the work being done for the data collection and most of the time being used for data collection and analysis. But generally, due to some necessary back and forth, availability of stakeholders, preparation, etc., I would think that maybe 4 to 6 months would be more realistic. But of course, this can vary. And what was that's for timelines. And then so then who should conduct the evaluation? I guess that also depends on really the objectives. If it's done internally, the advantage is that you have better access to information, and it might better access to farmers as well. So it can be useful, but at the same time, you can have a bias because it's your own product. So working with someone that is external can also be something that is interesting, because you will have an external point of view and might be able to see some issues that you would otherwise not identify.
Okay. Tara, would you like to add anything to that?
I think Coralie's right. The one thing I would add is that if this is a situation where you're a donor or some kind of public sector organization that's trying to compare products or trying to use this assessment to determine whether or not to support a product, I think it becomes more important to have somebody outside of the insurance company be the one doing the assessment. Again, it's just another way in which, as Coralie said, a potential bias could emerge. So again, deciding your objectives, and if the question is, do I want to support this or not, it might require different things than if the question is, how can we internally improve our product?
Okay, thanks. We have a few more specific questions on the indicators themselves. So does the tool assess the effectiveness and efficiency of any other risk management mechanism? So in comparison to insurance, so for example, preventive measures or savings products. So do we compare the offered solution against any other risk management solutions that the farmers would have access to?
from my perspective, I think it's important to look at the other risk management solutions for two reasons. The first of which, is there a gap in risk management such that insurance is needed? If they're already well covering their risk internally and don't seem to have significant problems in managing their risks in an area, then insurance might not be the best intervention for that area. On the other hand, if there are still gaps, despite certain existing risk management mechanisms, you can seek complementarities that increase the value more than each product alone. For example, if there are drought-tolerant seeds in an area, they're drought-tolerant, not drought-proof. So adding insurance to them could be lower the cost of insurance, but pick up when those seeds fail. So just that's something we're piloting right now at the AMA Innovation Lab in Tanzania and Mozambique. So let me know if you'd like more information on that project. But I think understanding what farmers are already doing so that you can understand how a product will or will not fit into that risk management portfolio that farmers have is an important step. Coralie,
Okay.
anything?
Yeah, I can. So I fully agree with Tara. And then just something I can add about the tool is that these other risk management strategies will be, I think, covered by indicator 3. So indicator 3 assesses whether the product covers appropriate risks. And again, for assessing this, so we will talk to the management and ask which evaluations have been done regarding the relevance of the risk covered in comparison to other alternatives. And we will talk to farmers and ask them directly how they feel about different risks. And in the end, going back to what farmers perceive and what they face is the approach that we take with this tool. If farmers already have other are covered for a risk, they will not perceive it as something that is important and needs coverage, basically. So that's how we kind of integrate these aspects directly into the tool, I think.
And then a quick question on what do you mean by management interviews? So who is management in this case?
So management will be I mean, management of the insurance company, insurance or partners. So this basically what we have different data sources, and from interviews with farmers, we will really try to understand what has been the experience of farmers. We will talk to sales agents, sales staff to understand how the information is communicated and see if there is any gap in this process of training and supervising agents. But then it's also important to understand, like the rationale of how the product has been developed, what studies have been done, and take a step back and have a broader understanding of the product. And this is something that we do by interviewing directly a few members of the insurance company or technical assistant partners or people who have been involved closely with the product.
Great, thanks. Maybe one more question. Maybe Pranav, you can chime in as well on this. So this is a question on the historical tool that we mentioned earlier. So there is a tool called PACE, which is quite similar. What are the main differences between PACE and the 3D tool? Also, PACE was meant to be a comparison between products. Can the 3D tool be used standalone, or does this also need to actually have some kind of comparison between products in the market? So Coralie, and then maybe.
So on the difference, on the difference between the PACE and the 3D, maybe Pranav will be able to say a bit more about the PACE, but generally, I think the approach is similar. Is really identifying different aspects of product value, but this has been adapted specifically for agricultural index insurance products. And so one of the big additions, for example, is typically the MQS that Tara presented earlier in the presentation, that really measures whether the index reliably predicts farmers' experience. So there have been some twists in the indicators to be really adapted to index insurance products. And then, sorry.
Go ahead, Coralie.
No, then in terms of comparing products, that's also, I mean, the 3D tool can also be used for different purposes. It can definitely be used to assess a specific product and see how to improve its value, the value it brings to client. But it's also an interesting tool, I think, to compare products and to see how they stand against these different indicators. So I think just like PACE, I think that could be that's very useful for both situations.
Yeah, just to quickly build on that, Jill, the issue with PACE was that when we developed it, that was 2011, and it was developed as a more of a generic tool to look at value from insurance as a whole. The 3D tool, as it stands today, focuses on agriculture insurance, as Coralie mentioned. It also is slightly more specific in terms of what is being looked at. The PACE, and without going into the details, had various sub-criteria within the 4 broad criteria. Here we are looking at extending those criteria into 14 very specific aspects that need to be looked at. Perhaps agent training being one more aspect that is of particular interest. Also the fact that the 3D tool essentially tries to separate the issue of what is a distributor's role in the entire process, and then look at from the delivery side how it is actually being delivered to the customers. So it has built upon the basis that PACE created, and slightly fine-tuned, tweaked a few things there, and brought about relevance for agriculture insurance and agriculture index insurance in particular to see if the farmer is actually understanding it, the farmer is actually accepting it, and how it can impact the farmer over a period of time. You talked about comparisons there. So yes, it is always good to have comparative products. But in our current scenario, we are comfortable by using the 3D tool as a kind of a standalone tool with an absolute score. But yes, it will always be good to have comparative products so that you can see how your own product can improve vis-a-vis the other products available in the market.
Thanks, Pranav. So there are a couple of questions from organizations on, how they can get access to the tool and the spreadsheet and the supporting documents, and if they need to apply to use it. So maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, so let me quickly kind of bring it about. As both Coralie and Tara mentioned, we will be making this tool available shortly. Currently, we are in the process of finalizing the technical guide that goes with it and making it simple so that more and more people can look at it. We will certainly be uploading it on our website, on University of California, the AMA website, so that there's a broader outreach to it. But in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to us at impactinsurance.ilo.org. The address will come up shortly, so don't worry, but feel free to reach out to us, and we will be only too happy to assist and guide you to the various tools and the process required to actually carry out the analysis. So we'll look forward to hearing from you and assist in guiding people to the process.
Great, thank you. I think we need to end here since we are 5 minutes past our designated time. I'm sorry we couldn't go through all the questions, but we will collate them and respond to the questions and then send them through email to all the registered participants. So as well, the slides and the recorded webinar will also be available online, and you'll get a link to the recording as well that you can share with your colleagues if they were not able to attend today. So as Just one quick note from the ILO's Impact Insurance Facility. So we're actually celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year. And this webinar was the first in a series of 4 webinars that we plan to hold this year, all kind of focused on client value. So please do stay tuned for those as well. And with that, I would like to just thank all the speakers for taking the time to share the tool today. And I hope it was useful for everyone. So do stay engaged. So as you see in the next slide, the email is there. So if you have any questions and if you're interested in using the tool, please do write to us and we will get back to you. Thanks so much.